Chosen one, stop for a moment and listen with your spirit. Because what you are about to hear may challenge something you have believed for a very long time. There is a person, a situation, or even a memory connected to the letter J that you may have been interpreting through your own emotions, fears, and expectations. But God is asking you to look again. What you assumed was obvious may not be the whole story. What you thought was rejection may have been protection. What you thought was an ending may have been divine redirection. Chosen one, God wants you to see what you could not see before. Chosen one, there are moments in your life when God allows the truth to remain hidden until your heart is strong enough to receive it. Not because He wants to confuse you, not because He wants you to suffer unnecessarily, but because timing matters in the spiritual realm. There are things you would have misunderstood if they had been revealed too early. There are people you would have chased if you had known too much. There are doors you would have forced open if you had understood what was waiting behind them. Sometimes God protects you through unanswered questions, and this is why you need to pay attention to what is happening around the letter J. Do not immediately assume that J represents the person you have been thinking about. Do not allow your emotions to fill in the blanks before God gives you understanding. The mind wants certainty. The heart wants confirmation. The flesh wants a sign that says, this is the one. But God may be saying, you are looking in the wrong direction. The chosen one. What if the person you thought was connected to your destiny was actually connected to your development? What if they were not sent to stay, but sent to teach? What if their presence awakened something in you that you needed to confront? What if the confusion surrounding them forced you to seek God more deeply? What if the pain you experienced through that connection became the very pressure that pushed you toward your purpose? Sometimes a person can be significant without being permanent. Read that again in your spirit. Someone can be important to your story without being the final chapter. And this is where many chosen ones become emotionally trapped. They confuse impact with assignment. They assume that because someone changed them, that person must belong in their future. But God can use people as instruments of transformation without making them lifelong companions. A person can carry a lesson without carrying your destiny. That is why God wants you to see this differently. You have been trying to understand J through what happened, what was said, what was not said, the distance, the silence, the strange timing, the sudden appearance, the disappearance, the messages, the memories, and the emotions that refuse to completely settle. But God is calling you beyond the surface. There is something deeper here. Maybe J is not who you think. Maybe the letter is not even about a person in the way you assumed. Maybe it represents a season, a decision, a job, a journey, a junction, a judgment, or something beginning with that letter that God is using to get your attention. Do not become so focused on the symbol that you miss the message. God is not trying to make you obsessed with a letter. He is trying to make you attentive to His voice. Chosen one, you have spent enough time trying to decode every little thing. You have looked at names, initials, coincidences, repeated numbers, unexpected encounters, dreams, songs, old memories, and moments that seem too perfectly timed to be random. And while God can absolutely use circumstances to get your attention, He does not want you living in a state of constant spiritual anxiety, where every coincidence becomes a prophecy and every person becomes a potential answer. God wants relationship, not obsession. He wants discernment, not fear. He wants you grounded in truth, not controlled by speculation. And perhaps that is the first thing you need to understand about J. You may have been asking, who is G? But God may be asking you, who are you becoming? That question changes everything, because sometimes the revelation is not about identifying another person. Sometimes the revelation is about recognizing yourself. You have changed. You are not the person who first encountered that situation. You are not as easily impressed as you once were. You are not as desperate for attention as you once were. You are not willing to abandon your peace just to keep someone close. You have learned what inconsistency feels like. You have learned what emotional confusion does to your spirit. You have learned that attraction is not always alignment. You have learned that chemistry is not always covenant. You have learned that someone can say beautiful things and still not have the capacity to love you properly. And God is teaching you something even deeper now. You do not need to know who J is in order to know who you are. Chosen one, there is freedom in that. Because when your identity becomes secure in God, you stop needing another person to validate what God already spoke over you. You stop asking, does this person choose me? And you start asking, does this relationship agree with what God is doing in my life? That is a completely different question. One is rooted in fear. The other is rooted in discernment. One says, please don't leave me. The other says, if this is not from God, give me the strength to release it. That is maturity. That is growth. That is the place God has been bringing you toward. And maybe that is why J has been confusing. Because confusion itself can become information. Not always proof that someone is evil. Not always proof that something is spiritually dangerous. But information. When something repeatedly produces chaos, uncertainty, manipulation, fear, and emotional exhaustion, you need to stop romanticizing the confusion and start examining the fruit. God does not require you to ignore reality just because you feel spiritually connected to someone. You can pray about a person and still walk away from them. You can love someone and still establish boundaries. You can forgive someone and still refuse to give them access to you. You can believe that God has a purpose for someone without believing that their purpose requires your presence. Chosen one, hear this carefully. Forgiveness does not mean permanent access. Love does not mean unlimited tolerance. Compassion does not mean self-abandonment. And spiritual discernment does not mean pretending everything is a divine mystery when someone's actions are already giving you an answer. Sometimes God answers through behavior. Sometimes He answers through closed doors. Sometimes He answers through repeated patterns. Sometimes He answers by allowing you to finally see what you kept explaining away. And perhaps you are entering that season now. You are beginning to see J without the fantasy. You are beginning to see the situation without the emotional filter. You are beginning to distinguish what actually happened from what you hoped would happen. And that distinction may hurt, but it can also heal you, because healing begins when reality no longer has to compete with imagination. Chosen one, perhaps you created a version of J in your mind that was more consistent, more mature, more loving, more spiritually aligned, and more intentional than the person actually demonstrated themselves to be. Maybe you loved the potential. Maybe you loved the possibility. Maybe you loved who they could become. Maybe you loved the future you imagined. But God is saying, look at what is, not only what could be. That is not cynicism. That is wisdom. God does not ask you to build your life around potential while ignoring patterns. You cannot marry someone's potential. You cannot build peace on promises that never become actions. You cannot sustain a relationship on memories alone. And you cannot keep sacrificing your present for a future that God never promised. This is why God wants you to see this. J may not be the person you thought. And if that is true, you do not need to panic. You do not need to force another answer. You do not need to immediately search for another J. You simply need to become still. There is a difference between waiting for God and hunting for signs. Waiting says, Lord, when you are ready, reveal what I need to know. Hunting says, I need an answer right now, and I will make everything fit. Chosen one, God is calling you from hunting into resting. Resting does not mean doing nothing. It means refusing to manipulate outcomes. It means refusing to chase what continually runs from you. It means refusing to beg for clarity from people who benefit from keeping you confused. It means refusing to turn every silence into a reason to send another message. It means trusting that what is truly aligned with your life will not require you to destroy your dignity to keep it alive. There is something coming into your understanding, not necessarily through a dramatic revelation. It may come quietly. One morning you may wake up and realize you no longer feel the same. One day you may hear the person's name and feel nothing. One day you may look at an old message and realize you were holding on to something that had already ended. One day you may understand why the door closed. One day you may thank God for not giving you what you begged Him to give you. And that day will be powerful, because sometimes the greatest miracle is not receiving the thing you wanted. Sometimes the miracle is becoming grateful that you did not receive it. Chosen one, think about the times you begged God for something that later would have damaged you. Think about the people you once thought you could not live without. Think about the opportunities you thought were perfect. Think about the doors you cried over when they closed. Now look at yourself. You survived, you grew. You learned. You became wiser. And perhaps what felt like abandonment was actually divine protection. You may not have understood it then because you were standing too close to the situation. Distance can reveal what proximity hides. When you are emotionally attached, you interpret everything through hope. When you step back, you begin to recognize patterns. And God may be giving you that distance now. Do not rush back simply because loneliness becomes uncomfortable. Loneliness is not always a sign that you need someone. Sometimes loneliness is the space where you learn how to hear yourself again. Sometimes solitude is where God removes the noise. Sometimes being alone is where you discover that your peace was never supposed to depend on another person's presence. Chosen one, J, may have occupied more space in your mind than they ever occupied in your actual life. You may have built entire conversations that never happened. You may have imagined explanations they never gave. You may have rehearsed reunions that never came. You may have predicted apologies that were never offered. You may have assigned meaning to actions that were simply actions. And God is not condemning you for that. He understands your heart. He understands why you hoped. He understands why you waited. He understands why you kept believing. But He is gently saying, come back to me. Not because your feelings are wrong, but because your feelings cannot be your only source of truth. You need discernment. You need wisdom. You need patience. You need reality. And most of all, you need God. Chosen one, there is something beautiful about the way God can restore your vision. At first, You see through pain. Then you see through questions. Then you see through experience. And eventually, you begin to see through wisdom. The same situation can look completely different when your heart is healed. You may revisit something that once broke you and realize, was not rejected, I was redirected. You may look at someone who once consumed your thoughts and say, I wanted them because I did not yet understand what I deserved. You may recognize that you were trying to obtain from another person what only God could give you: security, identity, validation, peace, and belonging. And once you receive those things from God, your standards change. You stop being impressed by attention. You start looking for character. You stop being addicted to intensity. You start valuing consistency. You stop chasing mysterious behavior. You start appreciating clear communication. You stop calling emotional instability passion. You start calling it what it is, and that is growth. Chosen one, maybe Jay was part of the old you. Maybe the reason this person still occupies your thoughts is because they are connected to a version of you that you are still grieving. You are not necessarily grieving them. You may be grieving who you were when you were with them. You may be grieving the dreams you had. You may be grieving the innocence you lost. You may be grieving the belief that if you loved someone enough, they would eventually understand your heart. But God is rebuilding you, and rebuilding sometimes requires letting go of the architecture of the past. You cannot build your future while constantly renovating an old relationship in your imagination. At some point, you have to let the past be the past, not because it meant nothing, but because it meant something different than you originally thought. Maybe its purpose was to awaken you. Maybe its purpose was to teach you boundaries. Maybe its purpose was to expose your patterns. Maybe its purpose was to show you what you will never tolerate again. Maybe its purpose was to teach you how deeply you can love. Maybe its purpose was to introduce you to yourself. And if that is all it was, then it was still significant. Chosen one, stop believing that something has to last forever to have been meaningful. Some seasons are short but transformative. Some encounters last a few months and change you for years. Some people enter your life and leave behind lessons that remain long after their names fade from your daily vocabulary. That does not mean you failed. It means you lived. You experienced. You learned. And now you are being invited into something deeper. You are being invited to stop asking, why did they do this to me? And begin asking, what is God teaching me through this? The first question keeps you looking backward. The second turns your face toward purpose. And purpose is where your strength begins to return. Chosen one, there may come a moment when Jay reaches out again. If that happens, do not automatically assume it is destiny. Do not automatically assume it is a sign. Do not automatically assume that because someone returns they have changed. A return is not the same thing as transformation. Words are not proof. Nostalgia is not proof. Apologies are not proof. Promises are not proof. Fruit is proof. Consistency is proof. Character is revealed over time, and you do not have to rush. You are allowed to observe. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to maintain boundaries. You are allowed to say, I need time. You are allowed to protect the peace God has given you. Chosen one, the old version of you may have opened the door immediately because you were afraid that if you did not, you would lose the person forever. But the new version of you understands that anything God truly intends for you does not need to be secured through panic. You do not have to chase what belongs to you. You do not have to compete for what is aligned with you. You do not have to convince someone to recognize your value. And you do not have to keep explaining your heart to someone committed to misunderstanding it. God knows your value. That is enough to begin. And perhaps this is what Jay is really revealing. Not who they are, but who you are becoming. You are becoming someone who can walk away without hatred. Someone who can forgive without returning to the same cycle. Someone who can love without losing themselves. Someone who can wait without obsessing. Someone who can receive without chasing. Someone who can say no without guilt. Someone who can recognize peace. Someone who can recognize confusion. Someone who no longer needs every question answered before moving forward. That is a powerful person, and that is the person God is developing. Chosen one, do not let the mystery of Jay distract you from the miracle happening inside you. There is a deeper work taking place. Your priorities are changing. Your discernment is sharpening. Your tolerance for manipulation is decreasing. Your appetite for empty attention is disappearing. Your relationship with God is becoming more personal. You are learning to pray without demanding a specific answer. You are learning to surrender without knowing the outcome. You are learning that faith is not getting God to agree with your plans. Faith is trusting Him when His plans look different from yours. And maybe His plan regarding Jay looks different. Maybe you wanted restoration. Maybe He wants release. Maybe you wanted an explanation. Maybe He wants peace. Maybe you wanted a relationship. Maybe He wants preparation. Maybe you wanted closure from them. Maybe He wants closure within you. Think about that. What if the closure you have been waiting for is not a conversation? What if it is a realization? What if one day you simply understand? What if you finally recognize that you do not need them to validate what happened? You know what you experienced. You know what you felt. You know what you tolerated. You know what you learned. And God knows the whole story. You can release the need for another human being to give you permission to heal. Chosen one, God sees the tears you never explained. He sees the nights when your mind replayed everything. He sees the moments when you questioned your worth. He sees the times you wondered why someone could treat you as though you were easy to lose. And he wants you to understand something. Their inability to value you is not evidence that you are without value. Their confusion does not define your clarity. Their rejection does not define your identity. Their absence does not mean God abandoned you. Their choice does not overrule God's purpose for your life. You are still here. You are still becoming. You are still being shaped. You are still being guided. And there is still more ahead. Chosen one, do not make a permanent decision based on a temporary emotional state. If you are hurting today, wait. If you are angry today, wait. If you are desperate today, wait. If you suddenly feel the urge to contact J, wait. Give your emotions time to settle. You do not need to act on every feeling. Feelings are real, but they are not always instructions. Sometimes you need to feel something without obeying it. You can miss someone without contacting them. You can love someone without returning to them. You can remember someone without reopening the door. You can wonder about someone without building your future around them. That is freedom, and God wants you free. Not free from love, free from bondage, free from obsession, free from fear, free from emotional cycles, free from the constant need to decode someone else's behavior, free to focus on what God is actually asking you to build. Because while you have been staring at the door marked J, there may be another door opening behind you. And you might miss it if you keep looking backward. Chosen one, your future deserves your attention. Your calling deserves your attention. Your healing deserves your attention. Your family, your work, your creativity, your character, your relationship with God, your peace, your growth. These things deserve your attention. Do not spend your entire life trying to understand someone who may not even be thinking about the situation with the same intensity. That is not punishment. That is a wake-up call. Bring your focus home. Bring your heart home. Bring your attention back to God. And when you do, something begins to happen. The need for signs decreases. The need for confirmation decreases. The need to know what J is doing decreases. You become more interested in what God is doing. And that shift is everything. Because the moment you stop asking, what are they thinking? You can finally ask, what is God building in me? The moment you stop asking, will they come back? You can ask, where am I going? The moment you stop asking, do they still care? You can ask, how can I care for the life God entrusted to me? That is where your next chapter begins, chosen one. Maybe the greatest revelation is that you were never waiting for J. You were waiting for yourself to become ready to move forward. You were waiting for the courage to release what no longer fits. You were waiting for the wisdom to stop confusing longing with destiny. You were waiting for the strength to choose peace over familiarity. You were waiting for the moment when your heart could finally agree with what your spirit had already known. And maybe that moment is closer than you think. So when you see the letter J, do not immediately ask who it belongs to. Ask what God is teaching you. When you remember the person, do not immediately ask whether they are coming back. Ask what the memory is revealing about your healing. When you feel the old emotion, do not immediately interpret it as a sign. Ask whether it is simply an old wound asking for compassion. When you feel uncertain, do not immediately search for another prediction. Return to prayer, return to truth, return to wisdom, return to yourself. Chosen one, God does not need you to understand everything tonight. You do not need every piece of the puzzle. You do not need to know the entire future. You only need enough light for the next step. And sometimes the next step is simply letting go. Sometimes the next step is waiting. Sometimes the next step is saying no. Sometimes the next step is forgiving. Sometimes the next step is beginning again. Sometimes the next step is refusing to return to what God already helped you escape. And sometimes the next step is becoming comfortable with not knowing. Because not knowing can be a form of trust. You are saying, God, I do not understand this, but I trust you more than I trust my assumptions. That is faith. And when you reach that place, J loses its power to control your emotions. The mystery becomes smaller. God becomes greater. The question becomes quieter. And your purpose becomes louder. Chosen one, there is still much you have not seen. There are connections you have not made. There are doors you have not entered. There are people you have not met. There are lessons you have not learned. There are opportunities you have not imagined. There are versions of yourself you have not yet encountered. Do not let one person become the entire definition of your future. Your story is bigger than one name. Your destiny is bigger than one relationship. Your purpose is bigger than one unanswered question. And your life is bigger than the letter J. So breathe. Release the pressure to know. Release the need to force meaning. Release the fear that if you let go, you will lose something God intended for you. What belongs in your life will not require you to betray yourself to keep it. What is truly aligned will be able to survive honesty. What is healthy will respect boundaries. What is genuine will withstand time. And what is from God will not need deception to remain standing. Chosen one, maybe tomorrow you will see something differently. Maybe next week you will understand something that seems impossible to understand today. Maybe months from now you will look back and realize that the thing you once called heartbreak was actually the beginning of your awakening. Do not rush the revelation. Let God reveal it layer by layer. There is no need to force the curtain open. There is no need to demand the entire picture. Trust the process of becoming. Because God is not only changing what is around you, He is changing what is within you. He is teaching you how to recognize peace. He is teaching you how to recognize character. He is teaching you how to recognize manipulation. He is teaching you how to recognize alignment. He is teaching you that your intuition must be submitted to wisdom, not fear. He is teaching you that spiritual maturity is not knowing everything. It is knowing when to wait. And perhaps the most important thing you need to hear right now is this: you do not have to chase the answer. Let the answer come. Let truth reveal itself. Let time expose what words conceal. Let action speak. Let God guide. And if J is not who you thought, then let that revelation free you instead of frightening you. Because sometimes God removes an illusion so He can introduce you to reality. And reality may not look like what you expected, but it can still be beautiful. It can still be peaceful. It can still be better. Chosen one. The story is not over simply because one chapter became confusing. Your life is still unfolding, and perhaps what you have called the J season was never meant to be the destination. Perhaps it was the preparation. Perhaps it was the interruption. Perhaps it was the mirror. Perhaps it was the lesson. Perhaps it was the moment that forced you to stop looking outward and finally look inward. And now you are standing at the edge of a new understanding, with your old assumptions behind you and a deeper kind of wisdom beginning to rise within you. Because there are things God has been showing you quietly all along, things you could not recognize when your heart was desperate for one particular answer. Things that become clearer when you stop trying to make another person fit a prophecy and start allowing God to define what is actually meant for you. And as you begin to see the difference between what you wanted and what was truly good for you, you may realize that the real revelation was never simply about who J is, but about why God allowed you to encounter this situation in the first place, what it awakened, what it exposed, what it healed, what it taught, and what it prepared you to recognize when the next door opens. Because the next door may not look familiar, it may not carry the same intensity, it may not come with confusion or emotional highs and lows, it may arrive quietly, steadily, with a peace that does not demand that you decode every moment. And when that happens, you will need to remember everything you are learning now, because the person you become after this season will not measure love by how intensely it hurts, will not measure destiny by how difficult it is to obtain, and will not mistake uncertainty for mystery simply because the heart wants the story to have a certain ending. And that is why you must keep your eyes open, keep your heart surrendered, keep your spirit grounded, and keep listening, because there is more being revealed than you can see right now. And the moment you finally understand what God has been trying to show you about J, you may also understand why He had to remove your focus from them before He could fully reveal what He has been preparing in you all along. Chosen one, there is a reason you are still thinking about this. There is a reason the question has remained in the background of your mind, even when you have tried to move on, even when you have told yourself that it no longer matters, even when you have filled your days with other responsibilities and other thoughts. Something about this situation still feels unfinished. But unfinished does not always mean that you are supposed to return. Sometimes unfinished means that there is still something you are supposed to understand. And that distinction is important, because your heart may interpret unfinished as an invitation to go backward, while God may be using the unfinished feeling to invite you deeper. You may think the missing piece is another conversation. You may think the missing piece is an apology. You may think the missing piece is a confession. You may think the missing piece is discovering what J really felt about you. But what if the missing piece is not information about them? What if the missing piece is understanding yourself? Chosen one, there are seasons when God will allow you to sit with a question, because the question is doing work inside you. You keep asking, why did this happen? But underneath that question may be another one. Why did I allow this to affect me so deeply? That question can open a door, not a door into shame, a door into understanding. Maybe you have a pattern of attaching your worth to how someone treats you. Maybe you learned early in life that love had to be earned. Maybe you became accustomed to proving that you were worthy of being chosen. Maybe you believed that if you were patient enough, understanding enough, forgiving enough, supportive enough, or loyal enough, eventually someone would recognize your value. But God is breaking that pattern. You were never created to audition for love. You were never created to beg someone to recognize what God already placed inside you. You were never created to become smaller so another person could feel comfortable. You were never created to live in emotional uncertainty just because you were afraid of losing someone. Chosen one, perhaps, J, touched that wound. Perhaps they did not create the wound, but they revealed it. And there is a difference. Some people enter our lives and expose places that were already hurting beneath the surface. Their actions become a mirror. They reveal what we tolerate, what we fear, what we crave, what we avoid, and what we have not yet surrendered to God. That is why you should not only ask what J did, ask what J revealed. Did you discover that you fear abandonment? Did you discover that silence makes you overthink? Did you discover that you seek reassurance from people who are inconsistent? Did you discover that you become attached to potential? Did you discover that you struggle to walk away when something is no longer healthy because you are afraid of being alone? If so, then there is a deeper healing taking place. And healing does not always feel like healing while it is happening. Sometimes healing feels like confusion because the old coping mechanisms are no longer working. You used to chase. Now you are learning to wait. You used to explain yourself repeatedly. Now you are learning to be silent. You used to accept crumbs. Now you are learning to recognize fullness. You used to interpret distance as something you needed to fix. Now you are learning that some distance is simply information. Chosen one. This is why you cannot allow yourself to become consumed by the identity of J. You do not need to solve the person. You need to understand the lesson. Because people are complicated. People can have good intentions and still hurt you. People can care about you and still be incapable of giving you what you need. People can miss you and still not be healthy for you. People can love you and still make choices that require you to step away. This is one of the hardest truths to accept. Love and compatibility are not always the same thing. Someone can have feelings for you and still not be ready. Someone can want you and still not know how to treat you. Someone can return and still repeat the same pattern. Someone can say they have changed and still have no evidence of transformation. That is why God is teaching you not to build your decisions on emotion alone. Look at the fruit. Look at consistency. Look at humility. Look at accountability. Look at whether actions match words. Look at whether peace increases or decreases around the connection. Look at whether you are becoming more yourself or less yourself. Because the right connection will not require you to abandon your identity in order to maintain it. Chosen one, maybe, J, was able to reach parts of you that no one else had reached. Maybe that made the connection feel supernatural. Maybe the intensity convinced you that it had to be destiny. But intensity alone is not proof of divine purpose. Sometimes intensity comes from unresolved wounds. Sometimes what feels like an unexplainable connection is two people activating each other's deepest fears. Sometimes you mistake emotional volatility for passion because calmness feels unfamiliar. God is teaching you the difference between excitement and peace. And peace may feel strange at first. When you have lived around uncertainty, consistency can feel boring. When you have lived around emotional highs and lows, stability can feel like something is missing. When you have spent years trying to earn someone's attention, freely given affection can feel suspicious. When you are accustomed to proving yourself, being accepted without performance can feel uncomfortable. But that does not mean healthy love is empty. It means your nervous system may need time to recognize safety. Chosen one, you are learning a new language. The language of peace, the language of boundaries, the language of self-respect, the language of patience, the language of discernment. And once you learn that language, you will never be able to pretend that confusion is enough again. You may still feel attraction. You may still miss someone. You may still have memories. But you will know that missing someone is not a command. You will know that attraction is not an instruction. You will know that memories are not promises. You will know that dreams are not always directions. And you will know that the presence of emotion does not automatically mean the presence of assignment. Chosen one, this is where your spiritual maturity becomes visible. Spiritual maturity is not being able to predict who will enter your life. It is being able to recognize what deserves access to your life. It is not knowing every hidden detail. It is knowing what God has already made clear. It is not chasing signs. It is walking in wisdom. It is not constantly asking for confirmation. It is learning to recognize character. And perhaps God has already given you more clarity than you realize. Maybe you have been asking Him to reveal whether J is right for you, while He has been showing you how you feel every time you interact with them. Maybe you feel drained. Maybe you feel anxious. Maybe you feel like you have to perform. Maybe you feel like you have to decode every message. Maybe you are constantly wondering where you stand. Maybe you are always waiting for the next change in behavior. That matters. Your peace matters. Your emotional stability matters. Your ability to be yourself matters. Chosen one, do not dismiss those things simply because you have strong feelings. Feelings can be sincere and still lead you toward the wrong decision. You can sincerely love someone and sincerely need to walk away. You can sincerely believe someone has good qualities and sincerely recognize that they are not good for your current season. That is not contradiction. That is wisdom. And perhaps this is the hidden meaning behind your experience with J. God may not be teaching you how to hold on to someone. He may be teaching you how to let go without losing yourself. That is a powerful lesson. Because anyone can hold on when everything is going well. But releasing something while still caring requires a different kind of strength. It requires trust. It requires surrender. It requires believing that your future is not dependent on one person staying. Chosen one, you may have been afraid that letting go would mean admitting that the relationship meant nothing. But that is not true. You can honor what happened without preserving it. You can appreciate the lesson without reopening the wound. You can be grateful for the good moments without ignoring the painful ones. You can wish someone well from a distance. You can release resentment without restoring access. And you can move forward without rewriting history. This is mature healing. You do not have to make J into a villain to justify leaving. You do not have to make them perfect to justify staying. You can simply accept reality. Maybe the connection was meaningful. Maybe the timing was wrong. Maybe both of you changed. Maybe you wanted different things. Maybe one person was ready and the other was not. Maybe circumstances made it impossible. Maybe the relationship exposed deeper issues. Maybe it was never designed to become what you imagined. And perhaps you do not need a more dramatic explanation than that. Chosen one, sometimes we want supernatural explanations for ordinary human limitations because ordinary explanations feel less satisfying. We want to believe that someone disappeared because God was preparing them. We want to believe that every separation is temporary. We want to believe that every intense connection has a divine future. But faith does not require fantasy. God can work through reality. God can work through ordinary circumstances. God can work through someone's free choices. God can work through closed doors. God can work through the consequences of decisions. And God can work through your disappointment. You do not need to turn every event into a prophecy to believe that God is present. He is present even when you do not understand. Chosen one, maybe the reason J feels so mysterious is because you are trying to solve something that does not need to be solved. Maybe the healthiest answer is simply, I do not know. That sentence can be incredibly powerful. I do not know what they feel. I do not know what they will do. I do not know whether they will return. I do not know what the future holds. But I know that God is with me. That is enough. You do not need tomorrow's certainty to obey today's wisdom. You do not need to know who is coming to prepare yourself. You do not need to know whether J will ever understand you in order to understand yourself. You do not need to know whether someone regrets losing you. You need to know what you are doing with the life you have today. Chosen one, there is a version of you waiting on the other side of this obsession. A calmer version. A wiser version. A version that does not check their phone every few minutes. A version that does not analyze punctuation in messages. A version that does not measure someone's interest by how quickly they respond. A version that does not need to interpret every song, dream, coincidence, or repeated initial. A version that can simply live. Imagine that. Imagine waking up and your first thought is not, what does this mean? You imagine going through your day without checking for signs. Imagine hearing the letter J and feeling no urgency. Imagine remembering the past without feeling pulled into it. Imagine having enough peace to let the unknown remain unknown. That is possible, and you are moving toward it. Chosen one, do not underestimate the power of time. Time reveals patterns. Time exposes inconsistency. Time shows whether words become actions. Time reveals whether an apology becomes change. Time shows whether distance creates growth or simply creates another cycle. You do not have to rush to determine someone's character. Observe. Let people reveal themselves. You do not need to force revelation. A person's consistent behavior will eventually tell you what you need to know. And when someone truly changes, you will not have to convince yourself that they changed. You will see it. Their responsibility will look different. Their communication will look different. Their boundaries will look different. Their humility will look different. Their treatment of you will look different. Change does not need to be announced constantly. It becomes visible. Chosen one, this is why you should never feel pressured to reopen a door simply because someone knocks again. You can listen, you can observe, you can pray, you can take your time, you can say no, you can say not yet, you can say, I need to see consistency. That is not being difficult. That is being wise. And if someone becomes angry because you require healthy behavior, that reaction tells you something too. The right people will not punish you for having boundaries. They may not always agree with you, but they will respect your right to make decisions about your life. Chosen one, God is teaching you that access to you is valuable. Your time is valuable. Your attention is valuable. Your energy is valuable. Your trust is valuable. Your emotional space is valuable. You cannot give those things to everyone who asks. Not everyone deserves a front row seat to your life. Some people can be loved from a distance. Some people can be prayed for from a distance. Some people can be forgiven from a distance. And some people can simply be released. That does not make you cruel. It makes you responsible for what God has entrusted to you. Your life is a stewardship. Your peace is a stewardship. Your gifts are a stewardship. Your future is a stewardship. And you should not constantly hand those things over to people who have demonstrated that they cannot handle them. Chosen one, perhaps the reason you keep thinking, J, is because you have not yet accepted that you are allowed to choose yourself. You may have spent so much time asking whether they would choose you that you forgot to ask whether you would choose you. Would you choose a life where you are constantly uncertain? Would you choose a connection where you cannot communicate openly? Would you choose a relationship where you have to beg for basic consideration? Would you choose a future where you are constantly questioning your worth? If the answer is no, then you already have information. You may not know what God will do with J, but you can know what you will no longer do to yourself. You will no longer abandon yourself. You will no longer silence your needs to keep someone comfortable. You will no longer mistake neglect for patience. You will no longer confuse inconsistency with mystery. You will no longer call anxiety intuition simply because your heart is afraid. You will no longer let another person's indecision determine your identity. Chosen one, this is where your power returns. Not power over another person, power over your own choices. You cannot control who stays. You cannot control who leaves. You cannot control what someone feels. You cannot control what someone decides. But you can control whether you keep chasing. You can control whether you keep waiting. You can control whether you continue accepting the same pattern. You can control whether you return to the same cycle. You can choose peace. And perhaps that is the decision God is placing before you. Not will J come back, but if J comes back, will you still be the same person? Because if you become healthier, wiser, and more discerning, you will not respond to the same behavior in the same way. Your growth changes the equation. The old you might have accepted a vague promise. The new you may require evidence. The old you might have responded immediately. The new you may pause. The old you might have interpreted attention as love. The new you looks for consistency. The old you might have feared losing someone. The new you fears losing your peace. And that is a beautiful transformation. Chosen one, maybe, J, is not who you think because you are no longer who you were. The person you thought you needed may not fit the person you are becoming. The relationship you once imagined may not align with the values you now understand. The behavior you once tolerated may now feel unbearable. The conversations you once found exciting may now feel empty. The attention you once craved may now feel insufficient. That is not because your heart became cold. Your standards became clear, and clarity often looks like distance from what once felt irresistible. You are beginning to recognize that not every open door deserves entry. Not every invitation deserves acceptance. Not every connection deserves continuation. Not every apology requires reconciliation. Not every feeling deserves action. Not every question needs an answer. Chosen one, let that truth settle into you. You are allowed to move forward without knowing everything. You are allowed to stop investigating. You are allowed to stop searching. You are allowed to stop checking. You are allowed to stop waiting for the perfect sign. You are allowed to say, God, if this is for me, you can make it clear in your timing. Until then, I will live. That is surrender. And surrender is not defeat. Surrender is releasing the illusion that you have to control the outcome. Chosen one, perhaps you have been exhausted because you have been carrying a burden God never asked you to carry. You have been trying to figure out another person's mind. You have been trying to predict their next move. You have been trying to interpret their silence. You have been trying to understand their contradictions. You have been trying to determine whether their distance means fear, pride, confusion, or lack of interest. But what if you stop? What if you let their actions belong to them? What if you stop carrying responsibility for choices you did not make? What if you stop trying to solve someone else's emotional life? You can care without carrying. You can love without controlling. You can pray without pursuing. You can forgive without reopening. You can hope without waiting indefinitely. And you can trust God without knowing what happens next. Chosen one, this is the place where peace begins. Not when everything around you changes. When you stop requiring everything around you to change before you allow yourself to be at peace. Maybe J never explains everything. Maybe you never get the conversation you wanted. Maybe you never receive the apology you imagined. Maybe they never understand how deeply their actions affected you. That may be painful, but it does not have to imprison you. You can heal without their participation. You can grow without their approval. You can move forward without their explanation. You can become whole without their return. And if one day they do return, you can meet them as a healed person rather than as the wounded person who was waiting for rescue. That difference matters. Because when you stop needing someone to complete the story, you become free to evaluate whether they actually belong in the next chapter. Chosen one, God may be preparing you for that kind of discernment. Not emotional impulsiveness, not spiritual fantasy, Not fear, discernment. You will recognize what is healthy because you will no longer be addicted to what is chaotic. You will recognize what is sincere because you will no longer be impressed by empty words. You will recognize what is aligned because you will no longer force what is misaligned. You will recognize what is peaceful because you will no longer call anxiety excitement. And when that understanding settles in your spirit, something that once felt complicated will become surprisingly simple. You will stop asking, "Oh, do I make this work?" And start asking, "Does this work without me abandoning myself?" You will stop asking, "How can I get them to choose me?" And start asking, "Do their choices demonstrate that they are capable of walking beside me?" You will stop asking, "What does this sign mean?" And start asking, "What does reality show me?" That is maturity. That is clarity. That is freedom. Chosen one, there is no shame in admitting that you once misunderstood someone. There is no shame in admitting that you were hopeful. There is no shame in admitting that you projected a future onto a situation. You were trying to make sense of what you felt. But you do not have to remain committed to an interpretation simply because you once believed it. You are allowed to update your understanding. You are allowed to say, "I was wrong about this." You are allowed to see someone differently. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to outgrow your own expectations. And sometimes the greatest sign of growth is being willing to admit that the thing you once prayed for is not the thing you need anymore. Chosen one, maybe you prayed for Jay to come back. And perhaps now your prayer is changing. Maybe you are beginning to pray, "God, bring me what is good for me, even if it looks different from what I imagined." That prayer is powerful, because it puts your future back into God's hands. You are no longer giving him instructions. You are asking for wisdom. You are no longer demanding a specific person. You are asking for the right kind of connection. You are no longer asking him to change someone's heart so that they will choose you. You are asking him to strengthen your heart so that you can choose wisely. That is a different level of faith. Chosen one, you may not see it yet, but this season is teaching you how to recognize the difference between desire and direction. You can desire something without being directed toward it. You can want someone without being called to remain connected to them. You can feel drawn towards something and still need to pause. You can have a powerful emotional experience and still need to evaluate it through wisdom. This is why your faith must be rooted in God rather than in signs. Signs can be misunderstood. Feelings can change. People can change. Circumstances can change. But wisdom allows you to navigate change without losing yourself. And perhaps God wants you to become so grounded that even if Jay suddenly appears, you will not lose your center. Even if they disappear, you will not collapse. Even if they apologize, you will not immediately surrender your boundaries. Even if they reject you, you will not question your worth. Even if they choose someone else, you will not assume that your life is over, because your identity will no longer depend on their decision. Chosen one, that is what God wants you to see. The greatest revelation may not be who Jay is. The greatest revelation may be who you are when Jah no longer determines how you feel about yourself. You are still valuable. You are still worthy. You are still capable of love. You are still capable of joy. You are still capable of building a beautiful life. You are still capable of trusting again. You are still capable of receiving healthy love. You are still capable of becoming everything God is calling you to become. One person's inability to recognize that does not erase it. One person's departure does not cancel it. One person's rejection does not redefine it. And one person's return does not create it. Your worth existed before they arrived. Your worth remains after they leave. Chosen one, keep walking, keep healing, keep learning, keep becoming. Let the mystery of Jay become smaller as the purpose of your life becomes larger. Let the unanswered questions become quieter as your relationship with God becomes deeper. Let the old attachment loosen as your identity becomes stronger. And if there is something you are meant to understand about this person or this situation, you do not have to force it. Truth has a way of becoming visible. What is hidden today may become obvious tomorrow. What feels complicated today may become simple later. What feels like loss today may reveal itself as protection. What feels like delay may become preparation. What feels like rejection may become redirection. And what feels like the end of a story may simply be the moment you finally stop reading the same page and turn it. Because beyond that page is another part of your life waiting to be lived. And you cannot enter it while constantly rereading the chapter that wounded you. You cannot receive the peace of the present while demanding that the past explain itself. And you cannot recognize what God is bringing into your future if your eyes remain fixed on the person who represents your past. Which is why this season requires more than emotional strength. It requires spiritual clarity, because there may still be moments when the memories return, moments when you wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently, moments when you imagine what Jay might say if they could finally speak honestly, moments when your heart tries to reopen a door that your wisdom knows was difficult for a reason. And in those moments you must remember that temptation is not always about something evil. Sometimes temptation is simply the desire to return to what is familiar, because the unknown feels frightening. And you must learn to recognize that familiar does not always mean safe. Comfortable does not always mean healthy. And history does not automatically create destiny, because God may be leading you into a future that feels unfamiliar precisely because it does not repeat the patterns of your past. And when you begin to recognize that, you will stop asking why the old door will not open, and start becoming curious about what exists beyond the door you have been afraid to approach. And perhaps that is where the next revelation will come. Not through another message from Jay, not through another coincidence, not through another attempt to decode the past, but through the quiet realization that you have already changed, that you no longer need the answer you once believed you needed, that you can finally stand in the presence of uncertainty without being consumed by it, and that you can trust God enough to let the truth arrive in its proper time. Because there are still pieces of this story you have not seen. There are still reasons behind certain delays you have not understood. There are still things God is protecting you from, and there are still things He is preparing you to receive. And as you continue walking, you may discover that the greatest answer was never hidden inside the person called Jay at all, but inside the transformation that began when you finally stopped chasing the answer and started listening to what God had been saying to your heart all along.